I took the photo because I wanted proof that I had made it through. The hospital room was too bright, the kind of sterile light that flattened everything into pale shades of white and blue. Tubes ran from my arm. A monitor hummed steadily beside the bed. My chest felt tight and foreign-stitched and wrapped beneath layers of gauze. I angled the phone carefully so it didn't look dramatic. Just honest. I hesitated before sending it. For a moment I stared at my mother's name at the top of the screen and wondered if I was being childish. I hadn't told her the surgery date until the week before. I had always been the strong one, the low-maintenance one. But this felt different. I pressed send. The message bubble appeared beneath the image. It went well. I'm okay. The reply came faster than I expected. You look tired. Don't post that. I blinked. Another message followed. It's not a flattering angle. Are you in pain? Now I'm glad you're safe. Not even I love you. Just imagine. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, waiting for a second wave of concern that didn't come. I didn't realize then how important that silence would become. I have never been the fragile one. For most of my adult life I was the person others called when something broke. I worked as a senior project strategist for a healthcare technology firm managing multi-million-dollar rollouts that required precision and calm under pressure. My job demanded steadiness. I built my reputation on it. I didn't miss deadlines. I didn't overshare stress. I handled setbacks quietly. If something felt overwhelming, I adjusted my schedule and kept moving. The chest pain started as tightness during long meetings. A brief flutter when I climbed stairs. I dismissed it at first, stress, caffeine, exhaustion. I had always believed that strength meant pushing through. That should have been my first clue. I scheduled the cardiology appointment alone. I sat through the tests alone. When the specialist said blockage and surgical intervention, I nodded like we were discussing quarterly projections. I told my mother a week before the surgery. It's routine, I said. They caught it early. Routine. I framed it that way because that's how I've always handled things. If I minimize the weight, no one else has to carry it. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to disrupt anyone's schedule. My sister had her own life. My parents were planning a weekend trip. I reassured them more than they reassured me. The night before surgery, I answered emails from my hospital bed. I set up contingency plans for my team. I left detailed notes for ongoing projects. I remember thinking I would recover quickly, that this would be a brief interruption, not an emotional event. I wasn't reckless. I was responsible. I had built a life where competence was my language. If something hurt, I handled it. If something faltered, I stabilized it. So when I sent that photo from the hospital bed, it wasn't a plea for attention. It was a rare admission that I wasn't invincible. And I didn't realize how vulnerable that made me. When I was 9, I won a regional spelling competition. My mother framed the certificate and placed it above my desk. She called relatives overseas. She told neighbors. She repeated my score as if it were proof of something larger. 2 months later, I caught the flu and missed 3 days of school. You can't fall behind, she said from the doorway of my bedroom, arms folded. Other kids manage. I remember lying under heavy blankets, shivering, trying to reconcile the difference between celebration and impatience. Achievement was spotlighted. Vulnerability was inconvenient. That pattern followed me into adolescence. When I made the honor roll, my father took me out for dinner. When I cried after a friendship fell apart, my mother told me to toughen up. If you let everything affect you, you'll never succeed, she would say. Succeed. The word carried more weight than comfort. Even illness had to be efficient. When I sprained my ankle in high school, my mother's first question wasn't whether it hurt. It was whether I could still sit my exams. You don't want this to define you, she said. Define me. Pain in our house was something to outgrow quickly. Emotional distress was reframed as weakness. Physical symptoms were minimized unless they threatened performance. That's just how life works, my father would add. You push through. I learned to interpret care as conditional reinforcement. Praise arrived when I excelled. Silence arrived when I struggled. Silence can be louder than criticism. There were no dramatic fights. No overt cruelty. Just a consistent message. Strength earns attention. Fragility disrupts it. I remember one winter when I had bronchitis. I tried to stay home from a school presentation. You don't want people thinking you can't handle pressure, my mother said. Pressure was expected. Relief was indulgent. By the time I reached adulthood, I had internalized the system. When I earned promotions, I shared them. When I felt overwhelmed, I edited the details. I framed stress as growth. I framed exhaustion as dedication. I stopped expecting softness. Then and now I feel sharply divided when I think about it. Then I believed love was something you proved through resilience. If I was strong enough, composed enough, exceptional enough, I would never risk being a burden. Now I understand that withholding vulnerability wasn't maturity. It was an adaptation. When the cardiologist described the blockage, part of me instinctively minimized it. Not because it wasn't serious, but because I had learned that visible weakness altered perception. Even sending that hospital photo felt like stepping outside a long-held script. For once I allowed myself to be seen as fragile. And the response I received was not concerning. It was a correction. You look tired. Don't post that. The words fit too neatly into the pattern I had grown up with. Image over impact. Performance over pain. That should have been my second clue. The surgery itself wasn't a rupture. The rupture was realizing that even in a hospital bed, I was expected to manage optics. I wasn't asking for applause. I was asking for presence. And in that moment I saw clearly what I had spent years normalizing. Conditional care isn't loud. It's consistent. And once you recognize it, you can't unseen it. The night before surgery, the hospital felt quieter than I expected. Not silent machines hummed softly, distant footsteps echoed down the corridor, but contained. Contained in a way that made everything inside my body feel louder. A nurse adjusted my fore and asked if I needed anything. Her voice was gentle and unhurried. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. She smiled as if she had heard that answer 1,000 times. "It's okay not to be," she said. That should have been my third clue. I wasn't used to that kind of softness. The gown felt too thin. The room is too bright. My phone rested on the tray table beside me, screen dark, waiting. I replayed the cardiologist's explanation in my head. Blockage. Correctable. Preventative. Logical words. Manageable words. But logic doesn't quiet the sound of your own heart when you're about to let someone open your chest. A different nurse came in to confirm my name and my date of birth. "Do you have someone coming in the morning?" she asked casually. "Yes," I said. It was technically true. My sister had promised to stop by after. I stared at my phone again. I hadn't planned to send my mother a photo. I don't usually document vulnerability. I curate competence. But something about the room, about the thin hospital blanket, and the steady beeping beside me made me want acknowledgement. Not advice. Please do not modify it. Just presence. I opened the camera slowly. For a moment I almost deleted the picture before sending it. You don't need this, I told myself. You're not a child. But the hope lingered quietly. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe seeing the tubes, the wires, and the sterile backdrop would interrupt the old pattern. I typed "It went well. I'm okay." My thumb hovered over the send button longer than it should have. The nurse adjusted my blanket again. "Try to rest," she said softly. Rest. I pressed send. For a brief moment before the reply arrived, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation that care might meet vulnerability. It didn't. But that brief hope told me something important. I still wanted it. The first reply had been about the angle. The second came minutes later. "Make sure you don't exaggerate this to people. Heart procedures are common." Common. As if rarity were the only justification for concern. I stared at the screen, waiting for the message to soften. It didn't. Another bubble appeared. "Your aunt will worry if she sees hospital photos." Worry. The implication wasn't that I deserved comfort. It was that my visibility caused inconvenience. I typed back slowly. "I'm not posting it. I just wanted you to know I'm okay." There was a longer pause this time. Then, "You should have taken better care of yourself. Stress doesn't just appear." I blinked. The words landed harder than I expected. "Are you in pain? Now I'm proud of you for catching it early. Just an assessment." I felt something tighten beneath the gauze on my chest, and for a moment I couldn't tell whether it was physical or emotional. I set the phone down. It buzzed again. "I don't need this kind of stress right now. We're trying to plan your father's retirement dinner." Stress. My surgery had become a scheduling disruption. I read the message twice as if repetition might reveal concern hidden between the lines. It didn't. I thought about responding defensively, explaining that I hadn't intended to create stress, that I had waited to tell her precisely because I didn't want to disrupt anything. Instead I typed, "I'm not asking you to do anything." The reply was immediate. "I know. Just don't make it bigger than it is." Bigger than it is. I remember being 15 and crying after failing a math exam. "It's one test," she had said. "Don't dramatize." I remember being 22 and overwhelmed before a presentation. "Pressure builds character," she had said. Now at 41, lying in a hospital bed with stitches across my chest, the tone hadn't changed. Minimize. Correct. Move on. Another message appeared. "You've always been strong. Don't start acting fragile now." The words felt almost rehearsed. Strong. The compliment disguised the dismissal. I looked at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the paint. I hadn't asked for fragility. I had asked for acknowledgement. The nurse came in again, checking my vitals. "Everything looks stable," she said. Stable. I almost laughed at the contrast. Physically I was stable. Emotionally something was shifting. My phone vibrated once more. "And please don't tell people it was serious. It sounds dramatic." Abel. I felt alone in a way that wasn't about physical presence. I had nurses adjusting blankets and checking monitors. I had doctors explaining recovery protocols. But the person I had hoped would soften at the sight of vulnerability had sharpened instead. That was the moment heartbreak replaced surprise. Not because she had been cruel, but because she had been consistent. And consistency makes denial impossible. I didn't respond again. I placed the phone face down on the tray table and watched the monitor beside me blink in steady rhythm. For years I had believed that if I was strong enough I would never test the boundaries of her care. Now I understand something different. The boundaries were always there. And my surgery hadn't crossed them. It had illuminated them. The forwarded message came 3 days after I was discharged. I was propped up in my own bed, pillows stacked carefully behind my shoulders, when my cousin accidentally sent me something that wasn't meant for me. "Sorry, wrong chat," she wrote immediately after. But I had already seen it. It was a screenshot from a family group thread. My mother's name was at the top. "She tends to dramatize things when she's overwhelmed," my mother had written. The procedure was routine. "We don't need to make it into a crisis." Routine. Dramatize. I stared at the words, the ache in my chest suddenly sharper. Another message followed beneath it. "She's always been intense. I'm sure she'll bounce back once she refocuses." Refocuses. The language was familiar. Illness reframed as a personality flaw. Pain reframed as exaggeration. For a moment I couldn't breathe, not because of the stitches but because of the clarity. This wasn't about misunderstanding the severity. It was about managing narrative. She's always been intense. I replayed the hospital room in my mind. The steady monitor. The surgeon's careful explanation. The nurse's gentle reassurance. None of it had been dramatic. It had been necessary. Yet in the family thread my surgery was reduced to temperament. I typed nothing. My cousin sent another message privately. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to send that to you." It didn't matter. I had already read enough. That was the moment I realized my health was an inconvenience. Not frightening. Not concerning. Inconvenient. I sat very still, phone resting in my hand, feeling something settle inside me that wasn't rage. It was confirmation. For years I had edited my struggles to make them digestible. I had softened setbacks, minimized pain, reframed stress so it wouldn't ripple outward. Now I saw what happened when I didn't. The ripple was contained not with comfort but with dismissal. "She tends to dramatize." The sentence was almost clinical. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't explosive. It was calculated. And in that calculation my vulnerability had no space. I closed the screenshot and placed my phone face down on the nightstand. For the first time since the surgery I wasn't hoping for understanding. I was seeing clearly. And clarity changes everything. I didn't reply to the screenshot. I didn't call my mother. I didn't forward her words back to her with accusations attached. For years I had learned that visible emotion in my family was reinterpreted as instability. If I reacted now it would confirm the narrative. So I did something different. I went quiet. Not withdrawn. Not passive. Strategic. I stopped sending updates about follow-up appointments. I stopped offering reassurance that I was recovering well. I let the information flow, narrow to necessity only. How are you feeling? My mother texted once. Recovering, I replied. Nothing more. Silence can be a boundary when words are misused. Instead of defending myself, I redirected my energy inward. I scheduled therapy sessions not because I was spiraling but because I wanted to understand why I had expected softness in the first place. In those sessions I said something out loud that surprised even me. I've always tried to make my pain efficient. My therapist nodded. What would it look like to let it exist without minimizing it? She asked. That question lingered. Recovery became more than physical. I adjusted my workload gradually. I declined social invitations without explanation. I slept when my body demanded it instead of pushing through. I stopped narrating resilience as proof of worth. What I didn't realize at first was that my silence unsettled them more than any confrontation would have. Without my updates, they had no material to correct. No image to manage. What's going on with you? My sister asked during one brief phone call. Nothing dramatic, I replied evenly. The word was intentional. Instead of arguing about the group chat, instead of defending the seriousness of my surgery, I allowed distance to do what debate never could. It clarified. I wasn't punishing them. I was recalibrating access. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't performing strength to protect someone else's comfort. The first large family gathering after my surgery happened 3 months later. My chest had healed, the scar fading from angry red to pale pink. I wore a fitted blazer not to conceal it, but to remind myself that recovery and competence could coexist. We were seated around my parents' dining table when my aunt asked casually, "So you're all better now?" Before I could answer, my mother laughed lightly. "Oh, it was nothing dramatic," she said. "Routine procedure." She tends to worry more than necessary. The room chuckled softly. There it was again. Routine. Dramatic. Intense. I felt the old instinct rise, the one that told me to smile, to let it pass, to preserve harmony. Instead, I set my glass down gently. "It wasn't dramatic," I said calmly. "But it was serious." The laughter thinned. My mother waved a hand dismissively. "Well, serious sounds alarming." "It was open-heart surgery," I replied evenly. "That qualifies." The table went quiet. My father shifted in his seat. My cousin stared at her plate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. "I don't need it minimized," I continued. "And I don't need it to be exaggerated. I just need it acknowledged." My mother's expression tightened slightly. "I was trying to keep things positive," she said. "I know," I replied. "But positivity isn't the same as honesty." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was uncomfortable. And sometimes discomfort is necessary for clarity. I hadn't planned to read it. But as the silence stretched across the table, I felt something settle inside me, steady, not reactive. "I want to share something," I said quietly. My mother's eyes flickered toward me, wary but composed. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. I had kept the messages. Not to weaponize them. To remind myself I hadn't imagined the tone. When I sent the hospital photo, I began keeping my voice level. This was the first response. I read it exactly as written. "You look tired. Don't post that." The room stilled. I continued. "It's not a flattering angle." A faint shift of chairs. Someone cleared their throat. "I didn't respond defensively," I said. "I just said I was okay." I scrolled down. Then I received this. I read each line slowly without emphasis. "Make sure you don't exaggerate this to people. Heart procedures are common. I don't need this kind of stress right now. Don't make it bigger than it is." The words sounded different aloud. Flatter. Sharper. I paused before opening the screenshot. And 3 days later I saw this message sent to the family group chat. My mother shifted in her seat. I read it verbatim. "She tends to dramatize things when she's overwhelmed. The procedure was routine. We don't need to make it into a crisis." No one laughed this time. No one nodded. I lowered the phone. "I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone," I said calmly. "I'm sharing it because I need the record to be accurate." My aunt looked up slowly. "You wrote that?" she asked my mother. My mother's face had lost its careful composure. I was trying to keep things calm, she said softly. I understand that, I replied. But calm isn't the same as dismissive. I didn't lean forward. I didn't accuse. I spent most of my life minimizing my pain so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone, I continued. That's on me. But I won't do that anymore. The room felt different now, not hostile, not fractured. Clear. My cousin spoke first. I didn't realize that's how it was framed, she said quietly. Of course she hadn't. Narratives shift when the full transcript is visible. My father looked at me not defensively but with something closer to recognition. I didn't see those messages, he admitted. I know, I said. Because they weren't meant to be seen. That was the point. For months the story had been that I was dramatic, sensitive, intense. Now the text stood on its own. No interpretation required. I wasn't vindictive. I was precise. And precision delivered calmly has a way of resetting rooms. The narrative didn't explode. It recalibrated. And for the first time since the surgery I felt something steadier than validation. I felt aligned. I let the silence settle before speaking again. I'm not asking for an apology, I said calmly. I'm asking for awareness. My voice didn't shake. Empathy isn't optional, I continued. It's not something that only applies when a situation looks impressive enough to justify it. I looked at my mother directly but not harshly. I won't use strength to protect anyone's image anymore, I said. If I'm in pain, I'll say it. If something is serious, I won't downplay it. No one interrupted. I've spent years being the strong one, I added. That doesn't mean I don't deserve care. The room felt still but not resistant. I don't need drama, I finished. I just need honesty. Then I placed my phone back into my purse and reached for my water. Not as a retreat. As a resolution. My mother didn't argue. Not immediately. Later that evening, when most of the relatives had left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, she found me alone in the hallway. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said quietly. I believed her. That was the complicated part. I know, I replied. You were trying to control the narrative. She flinched slightly at the word control. I didn't want people worrying, she said. Or judging. Judging who? I asked gently. She didn't answer directly. For the first time I saw something in her expression that wasn't defensiveness. It was confusing. As if she had followed a pattern for so long she hadn't realized it was one. I thought I was protecting you, she said. I don't need protection from honesty, I replied. The conversation didn't end in tears or reconciliation. It ended in awareness. Over the next few weeks, extended family members reached out quietly. My cousin sent a message. I'm sorry if we made you feel minimized. My aunt said, I didn't know the full context. I should have asked. None of it was dramatic. No one staged a formal apology. But the tone shifted. When someone asked how I was feeling at the next gathering, the question felt real, not polite. My mother's messages became simpler. How are you today? Do you need anything? No commentary about optics. No subtle reframing. I noticed something else too. I stopped explaining myself. When I declined an invitation, I didn't offer medical details. When I felt tired, I said so without softening it. Reducing emotional access wasn't punishment. It was a recalibration. For years I had overshared in hopes of being understood. Now I shared selectively in ways that felt aligned. Peace arrived quietly. Not because the dynamic transformed overnight, but because I stopped chasing approval. I no longer needed my vulnerability to be validated externally to feel legitimate. The surgery healed. The scar faded. But something else remained. Clarity. And clarity doesn't require applause. For most of my life I believed strength meant concealment. If I was composed enough, productive enough, resilient enough, then I would never inconvenience anyone with my pain. But strength without vulnerability is just performance. The surgery didn't weaken me. It exposed something I had been ignoring for years. I had been performing stability to protect other people's comfort. When I sent that photo from the hospital bed, I wasn't asking for drama. I was asking to be seen without filters. The reply hurt because it fit an old pattern. But clarity hurts less than confusion. Vulnerability is not fragility. It is honesty. And honesty doesn't require negotiation. I no longer shrink my experiences to make them digestible. I no longer edit my pain to preserve someone else's image. Care that depends on optics isn't care. It's management. What I learned is simple and lasting. I don't have to be strong to be worthy. I just have to be real. And that is more than enough.